Bare moments in history. When a single piece of information whispered in the wrong ear or read by the wrong eyes can unravel everything. When knowledge becomes both a privilege and a death sentence. When literacy, that basic human right we take for granted, transforms into the most dangerous weapon a man can possess. This is a story of a man who could read when he wasn't supposed to. A man who became indispensable precisely because of the one skill that should have made him invisible. And how one sentence hidden in a pile of correspondence revealed a truth so devastating that it would seal the fate of everyone who knew it. Some secrets are meant to stay buried in ink and paper. Some letters should never be opened. And some men should never learn to read. The Charleston plantation district sprawled across the South Carolina lowcountry like a patchwork of cotton and rice fields, each property a small kingdom unto itself. The year was 1852, and among the dozens of estates that lined the Cooper River, the Hightower plantation stood out not for its size, though it was considerable, but for its reputation as a place where everything ran with mechanical precision. Samuel Hightower had inherited the property from his father 15 years earlier, and in that time he had transformed it into one of the most profitable operations in the region. While other planters struggled with crop failures and market fluctuations, Hightower's yields remained consistently high. While others complained about labor problems and runaways, his plantation operated like clockwork. The secret, or so he told his peers at the Gentlemen's Club in Charleston, was efficiency, systems, order, and perhaps most importantly, finding the right person for the right task. Thomas was that person. He had arrived at the Hightower plantation as a child, purchased at auction in Charleston when he was barely 9 years old. The auction record listed him simply as boy, healthy, no defects. But there was something about the child that had caught Samuel Hightower's attention that day. The way the boy's eyes followed the auctioneer's written notations. The way his lips moved slightly as if sounding out the words on the signs around the market. Most buyers wouldn't have noticed. Most buyers wouldn't have cared. But Samuel Hightower had noticed, and he had cared very much. The plantation office was a modest building adjacent to the main house filled with ledgers, correspondence, bills of sale, and the endless paperwork that accompanied running a large agricultural operation. It was here that Tom had spent most of his days, and it was here that he became what no enslaved person was supposed to become, educated. The education hadn't happened all at once. In the beginning, Thomas had simply been assigned to clean the office, to keep the papers organized, to maintain the filing system. But Hightower had watched him, tested him, gradually revealing that he knew the boy could read. And instead of punishing this forbidden knowledge, he had cultivated it. You understand? Thomas Hightower had said one afternoon when Thomas was 12 that what you can do is illegal in this state. If anyone knew, you could be sold south or worse. But I have a use for you, a particular use. And if you serve me well in this capacity, you'll find your life here far more comfortable than most. It was a bargain struck, not between equals, but between a man with absolute power and a boy with no choice. Thomas would become Hightower's private secretary of sorts, the only enslaved person on the plantation who could read and write, the only one who could be trusted with the master's correspondence. The benefits were real. Thomas lived not in the quarters with the field hands, but in a small room attached to the office building. He ate better, dressed better, and was exempt from the brutal labor in the fields. He was never whipped, never sold, never loaned out to other planters. In the hierarchy of plantation life, he occupied a strange middle space, not free, but not quite as enslaved as the others. The cost was isolation. The field hands viewed him with suspicion, seeing him as the master's spy. The house servants treated him with careful distance, aware that he moved in spheres they didn't understand. Even the overseer, a hard-faced man named Garrett, seemed uncertain how to categorize Thomas. He was property, yes, but property with access to information that even Garrett wasn't privy to. And Thomas had access to everything. Every morning he would sort through the mail that arrived from Charleston. Letters from business associates in Boston and New York, correspondence from cotton brokers in Liverpool and Manchester, personal notes from Hightower's sister in Richmond, from his uncle in Mobile, from a dozen distant relatives and social acquaintances scattered across the South. His job was to read everything first, to categorize the letters by importance, to prepare summaries of lengthy business correspondence, and to handle responses to routine matters. Hightower would review his work each evening, make corrections, provide guidance, and then Thomas would prepare the final versions for mailing. It was a system that worked perfectly. Hightower could manage his extensive business interests without drowning in paperwork. Thomas, for his part, performed his duties with meticulous care, never giving his master reason to doubt the arrangement. But of course, Thomas read everything, every private letter, every business deal, every family secret that passed through Hightower's correspondence. He knew about the debts Hightower owed to banks in Charleston. He knew about the land speculation, deals that have gone sour in Georgia. He knew about the ongoing feud with Hightower's brother-in-law over their father's will. He knew which of the neighboring planters were on the verge of bankruptcy, which ones were selling off their enslaved workers to cover losses. Knowledge accumulated over years, a vast mental library of information that Thomas could never share, never act upon, never use for anything except serving his master more efficiently, until the letter arrived in September. It came in the regular post from Charleston, mixed in with a dozen other pieces of correspondence. The envelope was unremarkable. Good quality paper, a Charleston postmark addressed in a neat, feminine hand. Thomas opened it as he opened everything else, preparing to read and categorize. The letter was from a woman named Catherine Hayes, and it began innocuously enough. She wrote that she had been referred to Mr. Hightower by a mutual acquaintance in Charleston. She understood he was a gentleman of means and discretion. She had a matter to discuss that required both qualities. Thomas's eyes moved down the page, his expression neutral, professional. He had read hundreds of such letters. People were always approaching Hightower with business propositions, investment opportunities, requests for loans, or partnerships. But then came the sentence that changed everything. I am writing to inform you that your son, born to me 17 years ago and given the name Jonathan Hayes, is now of an age where his paternity should be acknowledged, at least privately, and his future secured. Thomas's hand froze. He read the sentence again, then again. The letter continued, but the words seemed to blur on the page. Catherine Hayes explained that she had never sought to cause difficulty for Mr. Hightower, that she had respected his position and his marriage. She had raised the boy herself with the help of her family. But times were difficult. Her parents had both passed, and she thought it only right that Hightower should contribute to the boy's education and eventual establishment in society. She was not demanding public acknowledgement, she stressed. She understood the delicacy of the situation, but surely a man of Hightower's wealth could provide some financial support. Surely he had some feeling for the child he had fathered. The letter was polite, almost apologetic in tone. There was no threat in the words, no hint of blackmail, but the implications were devastating. Samuel Hightower had a son, a white son, born out of wedlock to a woman in Charleston. A son he had never acknowledged, never mentioned. A son who, if his existence became known, could create a scandal that would rock Charleston society and potentially destroy Hightower's marriage. Thomas set the letter down carefully on the desk. His heart was pounding, but his face remained impassive. This was information he was not supposed to have. Asterisk information that was dangerous beyond measure. In the complex social hierarchy of the Antebellum South, a man's reputation was everything. Extramarital affairs were quietly tolerated among the planter class. But a child from such a liaison, especially one acknowledged, however privately, created legal and social complications. There was the wife to consider, Martha Hightower, who came from one of Charleston's oldest families and had brought substantial property to the marriage. There was the question of inheritance, of legitimate versus illegitimate children. There were the whispers, the speculation, the knowing looks at social gatherings. And there was something else, something that Thomas understood with absolute clarity. Quay was now the only person on the plantation, perhaps the only person in the world outside of Catherine Hayes herself, who knew this secret. The question that occupied his mind for the rest of that morning was simple. What was he going to do about it? The obvious answer, the safe answer, was nothing. He would file the letter with the others, marked as requiring Hightower's personal attention. He would not speak of it, not think of it, not acknowledge that he understood its significance. He would do his job exactly as he had always done it. But something held him back from filing the letter in the usual way. Perhaps it was the cumulative weight of 12 years of reading other people's secrets. Perhaps it was the strange, bitter knowledge that came from being the invisible observer of so many lives more privileged than his own. Perhaps it was simply curiosity, the very human need to know what would happen next. Whatever the reason, Thomas did something he had never done before. He made a copy of the letter. It was risky. If Hightower ever discovered that Thomas was keeping copies of correspondence, the consequences would be severe. But Thomas had become skilled over the years at handling paper, at writing quickly and neatly, and he had access to everything in the office: paper, ink, sealing wax, envelopes. He worked through the lunch hour when he knew he wouldn't be disturbed. His hand moved steadily across the page, reproducing Catherine Hayes's neat script as closely as he could. When he was finished, he had 2 letters that looked nearly identical. He placed the original in the pile for Hightower's evening review and hid the copy inside one of the old ledgers on the bottom shelf of the office bookcase. That evening, Hightower reviewed the correspondence as usual. Thomas watched from across the office, organizing papers, but his attention was focused on his master's face as those eyes moved down the page of Catherine Hayes's letter. Hightower's expression didn't change. That was the first surprise. His face remained calm, almost blank, as he read the letter once. Then again, when he finally set it aside, his movements were deliberate, controlled. "Tom, he said, his voice level. "Yes, sir. This letter from Miss Hayes. Prepare a response. Tell her that her letter has been received, that the matter will be given consideration, and that she should expect further correspondence within the month. Be polite, but non-committal." "Yes, sir. And Thomas, this letter and any response to it are to be filed separately, not with the general correspondence. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Hightower's eyes met his for just a moment, and in that moment, Thomas saw something he had rarely seen in his master's face. Uncertainty, not fear, exactly. Hightower was not a man who frightened easily. But there was a calculation happening behind those eyes, a weighing of options and consequences. "You understand?" "Of course," Hightower said carefully, "that everything that passes through this office is confidential. That discretion is the cornerstone of your position here." "I understand, sir." "Good. See to that letter." Then the response was drafted, reviewed, and sent. The original letter was filed in a locked drawer of Hightower's desk, separate from all other correspondence, and life on the plantation continued as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Over the following weeks, Thomas watched Hightower with new attention. The master made 2 trips to Charleston that fall, which was unusual. Typically, Hightower conducted business through correspondents and trusted agents, visiting the city only a few times a year. These trips were brief, just a day or 2 each, and Hightower offered no explanation for them beyond vague references to business matters. More letters arrived from Catherine Hayes. Thomas opened and read each one before passing them along. 2. Hightower. The tone of the letter shifted gradually from polite request to increasing concern. Miss Hayes wrote that she had expected more than just acknowledgement. She had hoped for specifics, an amount, a plan, some concrete indication that Hightower intended to fulfill his obligations. Her circumstances, she wrote, were becoming difficult. Her son was bright, deserved education, opportunities. Surely Mr. Hightower could understand a mother's concern for her child's future. Hightower's responses, which Thomas dutifully drafted under his master's guidance, remained polite but evasive. The matter was being considered. Arrangements took time. Patience was required. By November, the tone of Catherine Hayes's letters had changed again. Now, there was an edge to them, a hint of desperation, or perhaps frustration. She wrote that she had been patient for 17 years. She had asked for nothing during all that time, had kept her silence, had protected his reputation. She thought such loyalty deserved recognition. It was in this letter that she mentioned, almost casually, that her son Jonathan had expressed interest in traveling to visit his father's plantation. The boy was curious about the man who had given him life, even if he couldn't give him a name. Perhaps a visit could be arranged. Hightower's face, when he read that letter, was a study in controlled rage. He dictated a response that was notably colder than previous correspondence. Such a visit would be impossible, he wrote. Entirely inappropriate. Miss Hayes needed to understand that there were boundaries to what could be accommodated. Limit to what discretion allowed. Thomas copied that letter, too, adding it to his secret archive in the ledger. The response from Catherine Hayes came 2 weeks later, and it was the shortest letter yet. Just 3 sentences. "I see that I have misjudged your character. I believed you to be a man of honor. Perhaps I was wrong." Hightower crumpled that letter in his fist after reading it, then smoothed it out again carefully and filed it away. He said nothing to Thomas, gave no instructions for a response. But Thomas could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. Something was going to happen. Thomas could feel it in the atmosphere of the office, in the way Hightower now seemed to view every piece of correspondence with suspicion, in the frequency of his visits to Charleston. In December, Garrett, the overseer, received orders to hire additional guards for the plantation. This was unusual. The plantation had never had more than 2 men serving in that capacity, and their duties were primarily to patrol the property at night, to watch for runaways or unauthorized visitors. Now, suddenly, there were 4 guards, and they seemed to be paying particular attention to the main road that led to the plantation entrance. Thomas heard the whispers among the house servants. There had been threats. They said someone had written to the master, demanding money, thieves, or criminals of some kind. That's why the guards had been hired. But Thomas knew better. He knew exactly what Hightower was afraid of. The day before Christmas, a man arrived at the plantation gate. He was young, perhaps 17 or 18, well-dressed in the manner of Charleston's middle class. He told the guards that his name was Jonathan Hayes, and he wished to speak with Mr. Hightower on a matter of personal importance. The guards, following their instructions, turned him away. They were polite but firm. Mr. Hightower was not receiving visitors. If Mr. Hayes had business to discuss, he should conduct it through proper channels, through correspondence. The young man argued. He said he had traveled from Charleston, specifically for this meeting. He said it was a matter that could not be discussed in letters, he said. And Thomas heard this third hand from one of the house servants who had heard it from one of the guards. He said that he was family. The guards escorted him off the property. He left, but not before standing at the gate for a long moment, staring up the tree-lined drive toward the main house he would never enter. Thomas learned about the incident that evening from Hightower himself. There was a situation at the gate today, Hightower said, his voice carefully neutral. A young man claiming to be related to the family. The guards handled it appropriately. I see, Sir Thomas replied. If anyone should inquire about the incident, any of the servants, anyone at all, you are to say that it was a confused young man, perhaps touched by madness or strong drink. You understand? Yes, sir. Goodbye. Hightower's hand shook slightly as he poured himself a glass of whiskey that evening, and Thomas noticed. The letter that arrived in January was different from all the others. It came not from Catherine Hayes, but from a law office in Charleston, Blackwell & Sons, attorneys at law. Thomas's blood ran cold as he read it. The letter was formal, written in the dry legal language of professional correspondence. It informed Mr. Hightower that the firm was now representing Miss Catherine Hayes and her son Jonathan Hayes in a matter concerning paternity and financial support. The letter outlined in precise legal terms the evidence Miss Hayes possessed. Letters from Hightower written years earlier. Letters Thomas had never seen from before he had come to work in the office. Testimony from witnesses who could place Hightower and Miss Hayes together during the relevant time period. And the physical resemblance between Jonathan Hayes and the Hightower family. The letter stated that Miss Hayes did not wish for public scandal. She remained willing to settle the matter privately, but she required concrete action, formal acknowledgement of paternity in a legal document, a substantial sum to cover the costs of Jonathan's upbringing and education, and provisions for Jonathan's future. If these terms were not met within 30 days, the letter concluded, Miss Hayes would be forced to pursue the matter through the courts, and the details would necessarily become a matter of public record. It was blackmail, dressed up in legal language, polite blackmail, perhaps, but blackmail nonetheless. Thomas filed the letter as instructed, and waited for Hightower's reaction that evening. There was a long silence in the office after Hightower finished reading. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the scratch of Thomas's pen as he worked on routine correspondence at the side desk. Thomas Hightower finally said, his voice strange, distant. Yes, sir. How long have you worked in this office? The question caught Thomas off-guard. 12 years. Sir? Since I was 12 years old? 12 years, Hightower repeated. And in all that time, have you ever betrayed a confidence? Ever spoken to the business that passes through this room? No, sir. Never. No. Hightower agreed. You've been perfectly loyal, perfectly discreet, which is why I find myself in an unusual position. Thomas, I need to trust you with something that goes beyond our usual arrangement. Thomas set down his pen, giving Hightower his full attention. This matter with the Hayes woman, Hightower continued. It's complicated, messy, the kind of thing that can destroy a man if it's not handled properly. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I need someone who can travel to Charleston. On my behalf, someone who can deliver a message or perhaps retrieve something. Someone who won't ask questions or speak of what they've seen or heard. I understand, sir. Do you? Hightower's eyes were sharp, now calculating. Because what I'm about to ask you to do, it's outside the normal scope of your duties. It may require you to be clever, to think on your feet, and it absolutely requires your complete silence. Thomas nodded slowly. What would you need me to do, sir? Hightower stood and walked to the window, looking out over the dark plantation grounds. I need you to deliver a response to the lawyers in person, not through the mail. And I need you to make it clear, very clear, that I will not be extorted, that if Miss Hayes wishes to pursue this matter in court, she should understand that the full weight of the Hightower name and resources will be brought to bear, that such a course would be ruinous for her and her son. You want me to threaten them, sir? I want you to make them understand reality? Hightower corrected. Miss Hayes has lived a comfortable life in Charleston because I have provided for her quietly over the years. She owns her house because I arranged the purchase. She has enjoyed a certain social position because I ensured she had the means to maintain it. If she chooses to make this matter public, all of that ends. She'll be revealed as a woman who carried on an affair with a married man who conceived a child out of wedlock. Her son will be labeled a bastard. They'll both be ruined socially, and I'll make certain they're ruined financially as well. Thomas listened carefully, his face neutral, but his mind was racing. This was a side of Hightower he had never seen so directly. The cold calculation, the willingness to destroy those who threatened him. "I'll need papers," Thomas said carefully. "Travel documents, explaining why I'm going to Charleston. A letter of introduction to the lawyers, perhaps, so they'll agree to meet with me. All of that will be arranged," Hightower assured him. "You'll travel under the guise of conducting routine business for the plantation. As far as anyone else knows, you're simply picking up supplies or delivering crop samples. But your real purpose will be to deliver my message to the Blackwell firm and to gauge their seriousness. If they're reasonable, there may be room for a small settlement, something that satisfies Miss Hayes without acknowledging anything publicly. If they're intransigent, well, then we move to other strategies." "When would you want me to leave, sir?" "Tomorrow," Hightower said. "The response needs to be delivered before the 30-day deadline they've imposed. I'll have everything ready for you in the morning." That night, Thomas lay awake in his small room, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the secret archive of letters he had been copying and hiding in the office ledger. He thought about Catherine Hayes and her son turned away at the plantation gate. He thought about the power dynamics that governed his entire existence. Hightower's absolute authority over him, but also Thomas's unique access to information that could destroy his master. For the first time in his life, Thomas began to consider the possibility of leverage. He wasn't planning escape. That was nearly impossible for an enslaved person in South Carolina in 1853, particularly one who was as recognizable and valuable as he was. But perhaps there was another way. Perhaps the information he possessed, carefully used, could be transformed from mere knowledge into something more tangible. Security, protection, maybe even eventual freedom. The ideas were dangerous, bordering on suicidal, but they were there, taking shape in his mind as he listened to the sounds of the plantation at night. The next morning, Hightower provided Thomas with everything he needed. Travel papers, identifying him as the property of Samuel Hightower and authorized to travel on plantation business. A letter of introduction to the Blackwell law firm, a sealed envelope containing Hightower's formal response to their demands, and a small purse of coins for expenses. Garrett, the overseer, was instructed to escort Thomas to Charleston in the plantation wagon to see him, to the lawyer's office, and to wait while the business was conducted. Hightower was taking no chances that Thomas might attempt to run or to deviate from his assigned task. The journey to Charleston took most of the day. Garrett drove in silence, his weathered face unreadable. He had been given his instructions and would carry them out without question or curiosity. That was the kind of man he was. Charleston in January was cold and gray, the streets busy with commerce despite the chill. The law office of Blackwell & Sons was located near the waterfront in a respectable brick building that housed several professional firms. Garrett waited with the wagon, while Thomas climbed the stairs to the second-floor office. The clerk who greeted him was a young, white man who looked at Thomas with undisguised suspicion and curiosity. It was unusual, after all, for an enslaved person to arrive at a law office with business to conduct. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Samuel Hightower," Thomas explained, showing the letter of introduction. "I have a response to the correspondence sent to Mr. Hightower regarding the hay matter." The clerk's eyebrows rose. "I see. Wait. Here." He disappeared into an inner office, and Thomas heard low voices in discussion. After a few minutes, an older man emerged, one of the Blackwell partners Thomas assumed. He was perhaps 50 with iron gray hair and the kind of face that had spent years negotiating deals and settlements. "You're Hightower's man?" the lawyer asked. "Yes, sir." "And you have a message for us?" Thomas handed over the sealed envelope. The lawyer opened it there in the outer office, his eyes scanning the contents. His expression remained professionally neutral, but Thomas thought he detected a flicker of surprise or perhaps concern. "This is quite firm," the lawyer said finally. "Mr. Hightower is taking a rather aggressive stance." "I'm instructed to clarify Mr. Hightower's position," Thomas said carefully, reciting the speech he had rehearsed. "He maintains that the allegations have no basis, in fact, and that any attempt to pursue them publicly will be met with the full force of his legal and financial resources. He wishes to make clear that such a course would be detrimental to all parties involved." The lawyer studied him for a long moment. "You're educated," he observed. "Unusual for someone in your position." "Mr. Hightower has found it useful," Thomas replied carefully. "I'm sure he has." The lawyer tapped a letter against his palm thoughtfully. "Tell your master that I'll relay his response to my client. But I should inform you, and you may inform him, that Miss Hayes is not without resources of her own. She has evidence, she has witnesses, and she has a son who bears a remarkable resemblance to the Hightower family. If this matter goes to court, it won't be as easily dismissed as Mr. Hightower seems to believe." Thomas nodded. "I'll convey that to Mr. Hightower." "Sir? Good. Is there anything else? This was the moment. Thomas knew he should simply leave, return to Garrett in the wagon, complete his mission exactly as instructed. But instead, he heard himself say, "I wonder, sir, if it would be possible for me to speak briefly with Miss Hayes herself." The lawyer's eyes narrowed. "Why would you want to do that?" Mr. Hightower indicated that if there was room for reasonable compromise, I should explore those possibilities. Thomas improvised. It was a lie. Of course, Hightower had said no such thing, but it was a plausible lie, one that fit the situation. The lawyer considered this. "Miss Hayes isn't here, but I could potentially arrange for you to meet with her briefly, if you can wait an hour or so. She lives nearby." "I can wait," Thomas said. The hours stretched to nearly 2, but finally a woman arrived at the law office. Catherine Hayes was in her mid-40s, well-dressed but not wealthy, with the kind of face that had once been beautiful, and still retained a certain quiet dignity. She was accompanied by a young man who could only be Jonathan. The resemblance to Samuel Hightower was striking. Jonathan had the same strong jaw, the same set to his shoulders, the same color eyes. If anyone compared him to Hightower side by side, there would be no question of paternity. The meeting took place in a small conference room with the lawyer present but standing slightly apart, allowing Thomas and Catherine Hayes to speak. "You work for Samuel?" she asked, and there was something in her voice. Not quite bitterness, but a kind of tired resignation.
"Yes, ma'am."
"I manage his correspondence."